Welcome, everyone. As we're going to wait a minute or so for people to get into the room, to this Zoom room. We'll get started. I think I have, yes, disabled the waiting room, so people should be able to just pop right in. As you're getting in here, you guys will notice this is different than the other presentations. For this one, we're using the traditional Zoom meeting interface, so you can all get together, and our presenter has some great stuff in store for us in this session. And we are recording this. It will be available on demand again after about an hour and a half after the session ends today. So you will be able to watch that and tell all your friends that they can come back and watch this again as well. So Eva, let's see, how many minutes do you want to give for people to try to join in, or do you want me to?
Let's just give it like maybe another minute and then we can get started.
Okay, great. So those of you just joining us, if you're here for the, as you can see from the slide, becoming a JEDI master, practicing and encouraging diversity and inclusion, you are in the right room. And a few words of note, like I said, mentioned earlier, for those of you that just joined, anything you need to say, there's not a Q&A function here. It's the traditional Zoom environment. You should be able to use the chat feature to communicate in there. You won't be able to unmute and turn on your videos right away, but there might be an opportunity to do that later. And we'll go through that in the presentation. So I think more people will probably be joining and filtering in here in the next couple minutes. But Eva, I think it's probably a good idea to go ahead and get rolling here and introduce you so that you can get started.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, welcome everyone to the afternoon session, Becoming a JEDI Master, Practicing and Encouraging Diversity and Inclusion. And our speaker today is none other than Eva Reid, she has strong connections here to Arizona, and we love her so much. And we, just keep making her come back for more. And luckily for us, even though she ran away to way over on the other side of the continent to DC, where she's doing great things over there, she's still able to join us here back in Arizona. And with now this digital technology, we have her again. So Eva, for those of you who don't know, she is the owner and CEO of Eva Reid Consulting, and she provides professional development workshops, career coaching for women in tech and other fields where women are underrepresented. She also has over 25 years of experience in information technology, training, project management. She's noted for the caliber and creativity of her work as a technical workshop presenter and facilitator in professional, corporate, and government settings. And I think you're going to see that in action. Actually, I don't think, I know you're going to see that in action in this session. And we are super lucky and really thrilled to have you here, Eva, with us. And she's also a really good friend, and I'm really glad to have her here. So without further ado, I could go on and on and on about her, but I'm going to turn it over to Eva. It's all yours.
Thank you, Jamie. So I just have to say, I absolutely love that I have been able to participate in AJIC for the last few years. I was actually there in person, I guess, the last year that you all did an in-person event. And, having the digital opportunity to visit is really wonderful as well. And I am just so excited. It's one of my absolute favorite communities. There are only a few people on this session that I don't know. But those of you who know me just know that, that you all are just, anyway, I could go on and on as well. So welcome to my presentation. I am going to warn you right now that I believe in participatory presentations. So I'm going to expect that everyone has their chat window open and is ready to answer some questions. I am not going to ask anyone to, you don't have to speak up or anything if you don't want to, but but please do, you know, chat back and forth and chat amongst yourselves. Well, let's get started. So before you get too excited about me using the Star Wars metaphors for, the next hour or so to explain equality and fairness, that is not the plan. Number one, I am not that cool. Number two, several people have already done this and they've done it much better than I ever could. And I don't want to minimize the topic. So I think the topic is really important. It's worthy of direct discussion. And obviously it will remain in your brain as the presentation with Princess Leia at the beginning, and that's fine. But I really want to make sure that we're having a thoughtful conversation, not about Star Wars, but about us and our communities. But I also had to get a little bit of nerdiness in. So, here you go. You're welcome. Moving on. So as Jamie said, I am interested in helping women advance their professional careers. And the way I believe that happens is by making some shifts in your personal life and your personal community in order to make professional changes. So a lot of the things that I do are around this, making space for having these difficult conversations, like what is JEDI or JEDI? One of the things that I do, and you've probably heard of this before because Jamie runs one as well. Mine's a little bit different, but I run a Mugs and Mornings event on Thursday mornings via Zoom. And of course, everyone's welcome. But that's been a really amazing opportunity to have conversations with women about things like how we build community and how we set goals, and some more complicated questions like how do we exist in the world? And I think that kind of helped me think about how to put this presentation together today. And I hope that you'll kind of see the connections as we move through this talk. This is a sign that I have in my front yard, and it tells anyone that's walking by my house that I have feelings about things and maybe that I stand for something. My neighbor across the street has a Black Lives Matter sign. And as it happens, I believe in this sentiment. I believe in both sentiments. And hate has no home at my home or anywhere else in my life. But this sign is mostly performative. It doesn't tell you who I am or why this is important to me. And it doesn't tell you whether I am actively open-minded and make an effort to do things that actually get rid of hate, racism, or whatever ism that you would like to add. We've had training programs in our organizations since the 1960s, but they're mostly the show up for class, do the exercises, go back to what you were doing and don't think about it again until you have to take the class again in 3 years. And I don't know about you, but I have been to so many sexual harassment, equal opportunity type trainings over the years. There's usually a list and you have to repeat them each year. You get to check off the boxes every time you do one. There's lots of talking and not a lot of actual practice. These corporate programs focus on do's and don'ts. So it's the kind of thing where they're telling you that, we don't really care if you actually practice it, just don't do stupid stuff and get sent back to training. So my question is, and the question that I am asking all of you, this would be the rhetorical part of the presentation, but are we taking action? We have the classes, we're sitting in the classes and learning things, but are we actually practicing what we have learned? And I'm not saying that we're not doing anything at all. I'm saying that many of us are, but can we really make changes? Can we make changes in our actions? Can we do the work and make isms a thing of the past? And do we know what actions we're supposed to be taking? So now here's the question I actually want you to answer. And really, it's a two-parter. So the first part of the question is, what was the last diversity, equity, inclusion type class that you took at work or wherever, maybe at church? What was the last class that you took? I'd like you to put that in the chat. And I'll give you a minute to think about it, because you probably haven't thought about it in a while. Okay, Troy, what's your HR class? Because of course I'm watching the chat. I want to know. Yep, equal opportunity ADOT, been in that class. Diversity class about a year ago. Okay. Yeah, so I would suspect that most of us are taking the same kind of classes, and there's sort of this, sit in the class, listen to the professor or the facilitator, and if you're lucky, they might be giving you examples of things that have happened in the workplace, and then you kind of close the book, so to speak, and walk out of the class. And the second part of my question is, can you think of an example of something that you've learned in one of these classes that you've actually implemented, either at work or in your daily life? And it's okay if you can't think of anything, because it might not immediately pop to mind. That's fine. But just take a moment to think about it. Is there anything that you have learned in one of these diversity or EEO or sexual harassment trainings or Hispanic cultural awareness trainings that you have actually used? So I didn't want to say that this is what I expected, but I kind of expected that the answers would be something around, I don't really remember. I know we learned some good things, but I really didn't do anything with it after class. So I just want you to think about that. I want you to think about the fact that we spend all this time doing these classes. Again, most of us have a list that we have to check off each year. And yes, some of it is very common sense. But I really think that that piece that we're missing is that practice piece. And that's where this idea of JEDI, or Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion comes in. This is where we're adding the accountability and the implementation piece. So JEDI really takes DEI to the next level. Not only are we talking about it, but the idea is that JEDI is not just a personal value, it's a commitment to actively practice it, use it, and live it. It's not enough to go to class, take the class, walk out of the class, and go back to your desk. It's important to have a class or take the class and find what you can from that class, because honestly, they're not set up for you to really implement anything. take some of those learnings away and actually put them into practice. And I know it's hard because, again, we're not given classes that are really actionable. It's sort of like, again, here are the things you need to know to not get into trouble. The interesting thing about all of this, and I'm sure most of you know, is that in the last year, I mean, again, DEI has been around for a long time. It may not have been called that, and it may have been called whatever, equal opportunity employment, whatever it's been called, but DEI has been around for a long time. It has particularly become important since, let's say the beginning of the 2000s, but let's face it, it's really been important for all time. But the number of DEI related job postings, in other words, HR type positions that are focused around diversity and inclusion, increased by 123% between May and September of last year, of 2020. This is great. Lots of opportunities to have actionable conversations, but the concern that I have is that with this growth, and let's face it, this is explosive, the growth raises concerns for me. Is the industry here to stay? Does it really make sense to hire all of these people when the reality is we may not be coming up with actionable classes and actual actionable opportunities? And are we really making headway in the move towards equality? I don't have an answer for you. I think this is something that we are going to learn over time, but we can right now learn about the values. We can learn about the JEDI values. We can make our work towards equality active, authentic, and actionable. I think it's very important to understand that it is not just about stopping racism or classism or sexism or transphobia or whatever other ism you want to talk about. Of course we want to do that, but it's really about combating the isms and making our culture inhospitable for the isms. So we should be doing the self-learning, reading books, having conversations with people. We should be questioning the status quo and then implementing what we're learning. So in order to do this, we're using the JEDI sort of framework. And we'll start with the justice, where we're understanding what the barriers are. What are people's barriers to being equal with everyone else? How do we break those barriers down? What resources can we make available? What differences do we have between us? How can we support the perspectives of the people who are experiencing the barriers, those people who are different from us? So I'm going to start with justice, and I am going to ask you, there are a couple of parts to this. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask you just to think about what kinds of barriers have you seen or experienced? And this can be in work or life or what have you. If you have an example, feel free to share it with us. The important piece here is dismantling barriers, creating justice so that everybody can live a full and dignified life. Not just, oh, those people over there are doing really well, and we figured out how to make sure that this particular group isn't experiencing any isms. The question is, how do we do this for everybody so that our society can be all people, all individuals and communities have dignity and justice? The second piece of this framework is equity. And you'll notice that I am not talking equality here. That's a very important distinction, and I want to make sure that that is clear. Originally, I was going to talk about equality, and what I realized is that equality doesn't really work, at least not in this part of the framework. It's important, but it doesn't go far enough. So I wanted to specifically talk about equity as a system or as a structure that can help us to approach the process of getting to equality. So equity is the approach or the framework, and equality is the outcome of that approach being equitable. And in equity, what we're trying to do is we are trying to make sure that everyone has access to the same resources and opportunities, but we need to recognize what the barriers are that exist, because those barriers are going to impact people's access to resources. So you've probably seen this picture before. If you're on Facebook, perhaps you've seen it. It sort of seems silly and cartoony, but I think this is actually a really important thing to see and to maybe think about a little bit. So on the left-hand side of the picture, we have three people. I'm assuming it's a dad and two kids. And the three people are different heights, tallest to shortest, and they're all standing on equal sized boxes so that they can see over the fence. But guess what? They're all different sizes. So having equality doesn't help them see over the fence. Dad can see over the fence, but guess what? Dad could see over the fence before he was even standing on the block. Son number one can just barely see over the fence. That's great, but his little brother can't see over the fence. They all have equality, but that does not equal equity. So again, equity is creating resources or creating access to resources so that everyone can be equal in the end. Another way to think about this is think about having libraries. Let's say that every neighborhood in a particular city has a library. Equity is making sure that each library is funded appropriately and adequately. So all the structures are in good shape and all the services that are needed in a particular neighborhood are appropriate for that neighborhood and for the people using that library. So neighborhood X might not use computing services at the library very much. So the investment that that library needs to make in the computers and internet are not as high as another neighborhood. That neighborhood library X, might need more large print books because they have folks in that neighborhood that are older and their eyesight isn't as good. But then we go to look at neighborhood Y, and neighborhood Y has a lot of young adults who are trying to apply for jobs and they don't have necessarily the best internet access at home. So they are going to need those kinds of services. They're going to need computers and internet connections and maybe some other things that go along with that. So neighborhood Y and neighborhood Y's library need to spend more money on the computers and maybe not so much on the large print books because they're not being checked out as often. So neighborhood Y and neighborhood X are using equity to become equal, to provide services at the same level. I really like the example in the chat about transit. That's another really great conversation to have about equity. Giving people access to the places that they work, to their healthcare, to any number of services that you and I take for granted. I hop in my car or I hop onto the metro that's right near my house and I can get to whatever I need to. But if you think about all of the communities that aren't near a train station or don't have taxis just driving by every day, that's a really big difference. And they might be getting, two neighborhoods might be getting the same amount of money, but they're not getting the same services and they don't have needs for the same services. So I'd love, as we're talking, I'd love to hear if you all have other examples. Thank you again for the transit example. I think that's great. Food deserts is also a really good one. That's a very prominent question in DC, and we can certainly talk about that offline. But I really wanted to make sure that it was clear about the difference between equality and equity. Again, equity being our framework for getting to equality. Diversity is the third part of our framework. And I'd like you to imagine that you walk into the room and you are the only person in the room that has brown hair. Or you're the only person wearing pants, and you can decide how you want to interpret that. It might be fine, but it might also be very difficult to walk into that room and feel comfortable. Now imagine that you are the only person in the room in a wheelchair. What are the questions that you're going to ask? So I think that we can agree our collective goal is to have work and living spaces where there are people that represent a wide variety of races, genders, abilities, interests, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to ask, and again, this can be rhetorical or not, you're welcome to post in the chat here, what does diversity look like to you? I know that in my office looks very diverse. There are lots of people of different colors and lots of people of different religions and lots of people of different ages. But is that diversity? Well, it is in some sense, but there are not a lot of people who are women that I know of in our office. And granted, this is not something that you would necessarily know unless someone has said something, but I don't know of anyone in my office that considers themselves non-binary or is transgender. Now, maybe they're there and they just haven't chosen to, be open about it. But I would say in that respect that my office is not particularly diverse. So what does diversity look like to you? I think that's the question that we should all be asking ourselves. And is it a true diversity? If we're talking balance between men and women, that is part of a diverse community, but it's not the whole. So again, we really want to work towards a world in which everyone is represented. And it may not be that there are tons of everybody, because you may only have 5 people in your office. But what does that 5 people look like? What do those, and I mean it that way, what does that group look like? Is that group diverse? Finally, the last piece of our framework is inclusion, belonging. You might work in a diverse office, and I'm glad to see at least one of you is working in an extremely diverse environment right now. That's amazing. You might work in a diverse office, but is everyone encouraged to participate? Is everyone in your office able to share their perspective? Is your perspective acknowledged? And are all these different perspectives acknowledged and incorporated into daily business? If the answer is no, then you might be diverse, but it's not very inclusive. If you find yourself wondering if you fit in, and of course, some of that fitting in is about personalities and things like that. But if you have worked in the same place for a long time and you are still asking yourself if you belong, it's time to ask whether your team or your organization or whoever is practicing inclusion. Diversity does not guarantee inclusion. Inclusion in the workplace looks like many things, and I'll give you some examples, but it looks like setting agendas for meetings and providing them ahead of time so that everyone feels prepared, that no one's walking into a meeting feeling like they're unsure what's happening. Intentional conversations where employees are regularly acknowledged for their good work and told that they're valued. Desks that are modular and are able to adjust to accommodate people of different heights. I'm 5'5". I work at a desk that is designed for people who are 6 feet tall. We'll just leave it right there. And you can imagine the number of issues that I've had sitting at my desk working and not ending up with major amounts of issues. Desks that are able to accommodate people of not only different heights, but also different abilities, people who use wheelchairs, opportunities for employees to develop and advance their careers at their organization through training, other learning and development activities, wellness rooms and nursing spaces, a kosher refrigerator at work. I have a coworker who's kosher. He can't put anything in either of the refrigerators at work. He can't use the microwaves. So he has to plan his meals every day and has to eat at his desk because he is not included. So why are we talking about JEDI at a GIS conference? The reason, well, there are a variety of reasons. I will just say that as geographers and GIS professionals, we are uniquely positioned by the nature of what we do and how we think to provide tools and guidance to our peers. We have the skills to find gaps. We look at people who are not being served, and we're trying to understand who those people are, who is not being served. We take information about, let's say, financial or racial inequities, and we analyze that information so that we can use that as a lens and apply it to the programs that we manage and maintain. We can use maps and spatial analysis, dashboards, etc., to ensure that equitable experiences and outcomes for communities of people who have been historically excluded or underrepresented can happen. We guide racial equity in programs and services. We can do this by asking questions. We have the knowledge to ask not only some questions, but we can ask the right questions, or at least approach a more right question. Our language, the language of maps and location, puts us in a place where we can not only help ourselves, but also help others to recognize the inequalities that happen in our world. So I would like you to think for a moment about these three things: goals, accountability, and practice. And this is the part where we are going to, well, I'm going to do it this way. Let's see, we have, Jamie, am I correct? We have about 25 minutes?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. So what I think I'm going to do here is we are going to send folks into chat rooms or breakout rooms. We have 22 people. Someone dart. We had a couple of people just drop. That's totally okay. So
do we need to turn on? Sorry, do we need to?
Oh yeah, let's do that. Let's turn on voice and video for folks if they want to use it. You don't have to do either, but give that opportunity. So what I'd like to do is just as we're turning on people's ability to converse, I'm just going to put the question out there. What's one takeaway from what we've talked about so far? What's one takeaway that you had that you'd like to share with the group?
Are you asking people to unmute themselves and?
Yes, I think that's probably the best way to do it. I was thinking we could do chat, but either way, if you would like to speak up, you can unmute yourself. And if we run into any issues, we can probably do raised hands or something like that. But
I think the whole equity versus equality is huge. I mean, the visual, I'm like, who wouldn't get that visual? Who wouldn't understand? It's so simple. And it's like, duh.
Yeah, it's like once you see it, it makes so much sense, but we just don't think about it that way. And I remember when I first saw that image and I was like, oh my God, I get it.
Right?
Yeah.
If we could just burn that image in everybody's brain. So my smart ass remark was, oh, we just need to genetically modify everybody to get this,
There you go.
Something that I think that I've been working on is trying to meet people where they are. Don't have expectations. Someone in one of my classes said this the other night. She said she works in adult people who've been in trouble with the law and keeping them out of trouble, like recession and stuff, or recidivism. Sorry. She said she meets her customers where they're at. She doesn't have expectations of them that they can't handle. And, that's, I think, really important for diversity, because you're going to come across different people all the time.
I agree. I would say that I have questions about this because I really feel like that's important. And I think you're right. I think meeting people where they are is a really good one. But how do we approach, and I don't necessarily have the answer to this, by the way. So I'm not here to tell you like, this is what you need to do. But I wonder, is that enough? And I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure that meeting people where they are is enough. That might be a fine place to start. I would be curious to know what the group thinks.
So there's lots of articles out there now these days because of the growing political divides and just ideological divides that are going on right now on how do you talk to people that are on the other side, so to speak. And it's interesting to see some of the approaches that they suggest. And I know one of the articles I read was, really, and this is, we try and do this, try and promote, try and understand where they're coming from, try and understand their feelings and why they feel that way from their perspective, and agree with them that you understand why they would feel that way based on whatever the information they have, the background they have. Start the conversation that way, that I understand how you can feel this way based on what you told me. And then it went on to talk about working in questioning their information sources and stuff like that. But just that one piece about agreeing with how they feel that way based on their experience and what they know, can break down some barriers right off the bat. And so that's kind of stuck with me. And I've actually started trying to employ that with, not just with people, and it's not just with people you disagree with, but with,
Right.
Anybody you're talking to, see their opinions, their statements, and associate that to, what is making them feel that way.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, because I think if we don't feel like we're heard and we don't feel like we're understood, it's a non-starter. We've ended before you even begun.
The conversation's not going to get very far.
Right. And I think it's important, on both sides of whatever coin we're talking about, or both sides of whatever conversation we're talking about. Someone else, I think, had something that they wanted to.
Well, if I can chime in, I
Yeah.
think that growing up, I grew up in Iowa, and for most of my life, it was kind of like black-white. And I think, always, just because my community was always a defensive position, growing up, where I had to be on the defense, or, I was taught to be on the defense. And I think through the years, there's been a paradigm shift where I no longer just look at the black-white issue. I look at the issue as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more commonly, because of the times we live in, because of the media, I think it kind of broadens that paradigm.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm going through now. Okay.
Mhm.
Just the broadness of, diversity, and how America is shifting. And so it's new ground. And even for me, sometimes I have to, step back and say, okay, this is new ground. Okay. So you can't look at it the same way as how you grew up,
Yeah.
So
I think you've just made an extremely important point about the fact that it's constantly evolving. Our experiences are constantly evolving, and we have to be open to that, or we have to try to be open to it and do our best to be open to it, and figure out if we're not open to it, like find out what we can do, whether it's, I don't know, because going to classes, yes, diversity classes are not necessarily the way to go. I think I was really glad when I was asked to do this presentation, because I think these are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about them as professionals, not just as employees and HR people. So anyway, that was me a little bit rambly. Phil has something.
Yeah, this is Phil Balin from FEMA Region 9 and Recovery. And what we've learned from Hawaii's broadband effort, where they have a diverse group of people trying to understand what the needs are for digital equity within their communities, is they very effectively developed questionnaires, surveys that they've taken out through college kids, but out into the communities to get information about, again, the topic is broadband equity. How is their internet connection? Who needs internet connection? They're interested in telehealth, telemedicine, and economic capabilities. But the tool of GAB, creating useful surveys at a community level and aggregating that data for their understanding of what are the challenges, the barriers for underserved communities to different things. This particular group was working on digital equity. So the availability of internet, the cost of internet coverage. It's just an example.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And, I kind of spoke a little bit to that earlier, but it's really about asking the community what the community feels like it needs. It's not, certainly we as geographers, we can collect data. And we can say, all right, well, we know that these people live here and these people live here and these other people live here. And we can, see what the, income is for the neighborhoods and all this kind of stuff. But we really need to make that next step into asking the community what the community feels like it needs. Where are the where are the resources being spent, and are the resources being spent where the community thinks the resources need to go? Now, certainly there has to be like a meeting somewhere in the middle of what can be done versus, you know, what the needs are. But I think that's a really important piece of it, is doing that work to survey whatever that means, whether it's a survey instrument or, you know, talking to people or whatever. I think that's really important. I think someone else had something or had unmuted themselves. It's a little hard to tell because the names keep shifting around as people turn on and off. So, all right. Well, raise your hand if you have something that you would like to share. Otherwise, in our last, let's see, a few more minutes. So what I wanted to do here is I wanted to talk about, and I think, I don't know, let's not break out. Let's just do this as kind of a group. I wanted to talk about 3 different areas: what our goals are, how we are accountable, and then what is our practice. And I had a hard time deciding whether I wanted practice to be first or accountability to be first. So I'm going to say goals, practice, and then accountability. So I'd like to ask, you know, kind of thinking about what I have talked about so far, what we've just been talking about. What are some of the goals that you have? And I will, what I'm actually going to do with this is you can either put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself, or I'll call on you. And I'd like to create like our document for what our goals as AJIC participants are for creating or using this JEDI framework. What are our goals? How do we want to increase diversity and inclusion? How do we want to break down those barriers? What are some of the goals around this that we have? And what I am going to do is I am going to exit out of the presentation. Get to see all my stuff. And then I'm going to share again, and I will take notes. And I hope all of you understand how much I love you, because I don't take notes. I don't do notes. But it won't share the right screen. All right, love it, Steve. Get the message out. That's my plan. And I know someone was saying, I missed who it was, but someone was saying that they are having someone come into their office and talk about DEI. They're having a consultant come in. And Jamie, I'm going to ask you if you would kind of keep an eye on who is raising their hand and whatnot. Jamie and Shay.
I think Shay wanted to talk, actually.
Go Shay.
Trying to figure out how to raise my hand. So it's faster to turn on my camera. I want goals. I think it's, as everyone's saying, get the information out there. But I don't mean to bring up challenges, but I'm gonna.
No, that's okay.
So again, like you were saying, I went to a fantastic discussion a year ago, but it was a year ago, and I have a lot of other things going on. So I know I learned some important things, but if it's not, like you said, a discussion that maybe happens more often, then it was really informative. And then it just got pushed down the mental list. So having it more integrated, a little repetitive. And another challenge I have is, I know a lot of people who would like to make improvements in their diversity or education or understanding of other people's views. But we have one African-American staff member. I work at ASU. It's really diverse, but we have one African-American person on the staff and one faculty. and since I mostly work with staff, she is sick of everyone asking her what to do. And I don't blame her. So the challenge is, are you educated without singling out any, whether that's African American, the one female, the one person in a wheelchair, whatever the less majority group is, how do you learn what people want without singling out people?
Yeah, how do we not tokenize people? I think that's a really great question. I don't know the answer because I'm trying to think how to say this without I mean, let's face it, I do what I do. So often I am asked to do these presentations and I love it. And I enjoy making the space for these conversations. But I was talking with someone the other day and they're like, we were kind of afraid to ask you because like, we don't want to keep asking you and make you like the token person. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the question or the concern. I don't have an answer. I think it's important. Well, okay, I do kind of have an answer. My answer is, I made this point earlier, there's a lot of self-learning that needs to happen. And there's a lot of, people can go out and like, there's lots of websites. I have some resources at the end of this, which of course I forgot to put in the actual presentation. So I'll do that before I post it. But I have resources that people can go read and learn about the issues. So I think that's another piece of it. Like, don't always ask the question. Go ahead, Casey.
I think that you need to ask yourself this, or whoever's dealing with something like this. For example, I know this because I'm African American and people want my opinion because I'm African American. But the African American community is so diverse, and all communities are diverse.
Yes.
So if you keep that in the back of your mind, okay, he may not know the answer to what I'm asking. And I think that will help anyone to get over that hurdle.
Yeah, and Casey, if I may, I'm gonna take a stab at, well, not even take a stab. My guess is, because you mentioned where you're from, and I'm from New York City, I'm guessing our upbringing was really different. Like, we
Right.
look similar.
Mhm.
We don't actually look similar at all, but
Right.
we have some things in common. But that was such a good point, because it is like, communities are not monoliths. They're just not. And it doesn't matter what community you're talking about. I grew up in New York City. Casey grew up in Iowa. I grew up as the child of a first-generation American whose parents were from Jamaica. I don't know that that's Casey's experience. It probably was not. Maybe it is. I don't know. But like, we're two people here sitting on a call and we could not be more different, even though people might look at us and say, oh, they had similar experiences. Well, no, we didn't necessarily. So while we might have some things in common, we are not, and so, yes, I wanted to use as an example of like, why you couldn't ask me and Casey the same question and get the same answer.
Exactly.
Also,
exactly.
could I add something?
Yes.
And thank you too for this presentation. It was great. But also maybe just to reframe the whole asking the person who, gets asked this all the time in all these different situations. I don't think it's that person isn't interested in the topic, doesn't want to engage on it and help people and all the stuff. But at some point, you can't keep asking people to do this extra work in the workplace for free.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to say that this is an important thing to your organization, if you're going to say that it's something valuable, like maybe that should be something that's actually valued in like a monetary sense. And so, because people don't mind taking on extra responsibility, right? But in the workplace, there are some things that you kind of like expect along with that. So maybe to that person or to you having to do this extra work, there should be like a real, incentive for doing that and a real, appreciation for that work.
Agreed. I think that's a really good point. And I think too, if a person says, I don't really want to do it, that's a totally acceptable answer. So yeah, thank you, Vivian. That was a really great point. So we could go on and we could come up with a lot of other goals. I really like what we came up with. So I'm going to ask you, how do we practice this? How do we not just ask questions, not just, find people to talk to? What's our practice going to be? And I think someone mentioned, having more conversations like this, more facilitated conversations. What else in the last, in 2 minutes?
I think someone had put it in the chat earlier, but speaking up. So how we were talking earlier about a workplace might be diverse, but people don't feel included.
Mm-hmm.
So, that practice speaking up and making people feel included and acknowledged.
Love it.
I think this probably goes along with what Sarah just said. So, through our actions, making a difference. So we want to include people, act that way, do it. So set the example for others. We can do it that way. Steve says, typed in their work to stop lumping people into communities and recognize everyone as individuals.
And if we had more time, I'd say, all right, so how are we going to do that? We don't, so I'm not. But that's the kind of thing that I want people to be thinking about, not just what are our goals and not just what's our practice going to be, but, like how are we putting that into practice? Are we doing it? Have we made it a habit? There is so much more that we could talk about. There is so much more that we could do with this. I honestly I had no idea how much people would be interested in having this conversation. I am so grateful for all of you. I'm so grateful for all of your input and your attention. And I so much appreciate everyone being here. And thank you, Jamie and Shay and the whole AGIC community for inviting me to be here. Hopefully you can see my screen. This will be posted in my space for the presentation. So I encourage you to reach out to me. I always give people the opportunity to have a chat with me via Zoom. And I'd love to see you on LinkedIn. It's really easy to find me, Eva Reid. Thank you so much.
Eva, I want to thank you so much. This has been really great. And I want to ask all you guys that are here, if you really enjoyed this and you want to see this continue, fill out the feedback survey and put in there, something that you'd want to see us do something like this again. AGIC can certainly, I'm sure we can rope Eva into coming back again, but we could also, do something to facilitate this. And facilitate something to keep this conversation going and take it further and working towards the ultimate goal of equality everywhere, diversity, inclusion, all that. So anyways, thank you, everyone. I don't know that I have anything else to say unless Shay, if I missed something else, and we're at the top of the hour. Thanks everybody.
Go visit vendors.
Go visit our vendors in their exhibitor booths virtually, and we'll see you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And remember, tomorrow there's virtual happy hour tomorrow.
Well, and one crazy thought was make this an agenda item for every council meeting, every committee meeting, every work group meeting. You know, how can we work to make this happen? Make a change.
That's a great idea, Steve.
I love it.
I wish we knew somebody in here that was on the AGIC leadership that could do that.
I love it.
I'm making a note.
Great. Okay, with that,
I'll
I'm
be
gonna stop.
back next year at AGIC to check in.
She's going to be in Prescott in person with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will be
can't
dragging her.
Yeah, because you're gonna have such a hard time.
I know.
wait. You got the dates on your calendar yet?
Not yet, but I guess I need to go do that.
Lock it out.
Need to
Book
save
all
up
of
some
October.
save up some points.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but I think we could still keep chatting if people wanted to.
I'm here.
Okay, great.